Have you been paying any attention to the impeachment, Christian?
A little bit, yeah. I heard they voted today.
They did, yes. So they have approved 2 articles of impeachment against Trump in the judiciary vote. So we haven't really gotten into this much this week because it's been busy. We've been doing a lot of stuff, but I have some thoughts on all of this. So first of all, it is beginning to look more and more like Christmas everywhere.
I was waiting for that.
No, it's beginning to look more and more like
impeachment.
Yeah, well, there you go. Like it's beginning to look like my prediction. What I've said all along about this, regardless of how anyone feels about it, my prediction is going to come true. I think it's pretty clear.
He'll get a second term.
Well, there is that, but what's going to happen short term with this is, he's going to, so the House will impeach him, and then the Senate trial will be very quick. Mitch McConnell is signaling that he's going to try to get it done quickly and out of the way. The Republicans control the Senate, and Trump will be acquitted, and that will be it. And that will help him, yes. I mean, that's going to, that's why Trump hasn't really, at times he's almost kind of said, bring it on, because, and I take no joy in this because I'm no big fan of the president, as you all may have noticed. But yeah, I believe that in the end, this actually does help him. I think it just kind of energizes his base, and all the MAGA people say, see, they tried to take him down, but they couldn't. He's stronger than ever. And, it won't matter that, his biggest campaign promise, build a wall, is just never going to happen. So they will overlook that, but they will be more energized than ever. And yes, I still do believe absolutely he'll win a second term. My prediction being a little more specifically that I believe he'll actually lose the popular vote again, but he'll still carry all the same states. And I don't want to rehash all the reasons I think that. If you're a regular listener, you already know, but there are reasons I have to support my thesis, if you will. As far as the impeachment itself, so the 2 articles of impeachment are, and I'll just speak kind of extemporaneously on this, abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, which is different than obstruction of justice, by the way. So the abuse of power part is all about Ukraine, which, by the way, because of, I don't know if you ever heard it, Christian, the day that a couple of months ago now, John Hopwood and I did a live reading of the summary of the transcript that was released of Trump's call with President Zelensky of Ukraine, where I played President Trump. And my Trump impression is not great. But John Hopwood, he played Zelensky, and he knocked it out of the park. It was incredible. It was very, very funny. But because of that day, now, every time I hear the word Ukraine, in my mind, I hear John Hopwood as President Zelensky saying, Ukraine. And that's absolutely true, by the way. I'm not even saying that to be funny. That literally happens in my head every single time I hear the word Ukraine. In my mind, I hear Ukraine, and I can't do it the way Hopwood does it. But his Ukrainian accent was quite impressive. But so, first of all, and I said on Facebook, I think the Democrats have kind of botched this. I mean, putting aside the fact that they've walked right into, well, let's address this part first. So in a sense, they've walked right into Trump's trap, right? I mean, we all know how this turns out. I know. So speaking of John Hopwood, he sat in that chair over there, and we got into a pretty animated discussion one day on the show. And he kept telling me, because I kept saying, look, the Senate's just going to acquit him, and then that's it. And he kept saying, you don't know history. That's not what's going to happen. You don't know history. He must have said, you don't know history 11 times. And I kept saying, it doesn't matter. I know history. You don't think I know previous impeachments? I understand Watergate and the impeachment of Bill Clinton but Andrew Johnson. But we're in a different time, and Republicans will do whatever they can to protect Trump. And it doesn't, there's nothing he can do that they'll ever hold him to account for. So, I think the Democrats, in one sense, I think they've walked right into a trap here because I think that this will have ultimately done more to help Trump than harm him. On the other hand, I did have some sympathy at certain points for Nancy Pelosi in the sense that early on, when she kept resisting, when others kept saying, look, we need to impeach, after the Mueller report came out, and I did read the Mueller report, by the way, thanks to Fred, he sent it to me, and it took me a while, but I finally did get through it, and I think there's impeachable conduct in that. I think there's 12 examples in there of obstruction of justice by the president. But of course, after the Mueller report, and of course, it also, too, it depends on interpretation, right? If you're a Republican, you have a completely different read of the Mueller report. If you're a Republican, your belief is it completely exonerated him. And I'm sorry, I actually read it, and I don't see it that way. And I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, but I read it. Sorry, I believe he's guilty of obstruction of justice, clearly. But after the Mueller report, of course, Pelosi was under all this pressure. Look, we've got this here. We need to impeach. And she was very, very resistant because she's obviously an incredibly talented politician. She's pushing 80 years old and her skills are still, I think, pretty sharp. And she knows, she knew that it would be walking into a trap. And eventually it got to a point, after the Ukraine call and the summary of the transcript, by the way. We need to stop calling that a transcript. That's not the full transcript. It's a summary of it. But, it eventually got to a point where it's like, okay, well, you have all this. You're derelict in your constitutional duty if you don't address it. So she finally had to give in. But I'm sure, hello to Tony Petrello, who joins us in the Facebook live chat. But I'm sure, there's a big part of her that wishes that, she could have continued to avoid all that. But the two articles of impeachment here, let's address those. The first one is abuse of power, referring to the Ukraine call, where he asked for a favor and of course, all that came out during the hearings, what he really wanted was an announcement that they were going to be investigating the Bidens, that Ukraine was going to investigate the Bidens and whatnot because he wanted to hurt Biden. To me, I think the quid pro quo, I know I'm doing a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking here, but through this whole thing, I felt like maybe the Democrats put a little too much emphasis on the quid pro quo part because, take Gordon Sondland, for example. There was a lot of, in my opinion, sort of, conflicting information within his own testimony. At one point he's saying, well, no one ever actually told him directly that there was a quid pro quo. But at another point, I think in his opening statement, he's saying everyone understood there was a quid pro quo and so forth. But I've said from the beginning of that, you can take the quid pro quo element of the Ukraine request completely out of it. And he still asked a foreign power for help to damage a political opponent.
Mm-hmm.
That clearly is what he did. So whether it was for, hey, do this and then you'll get this money, that's bad. But even without the quid pro quo, he asked a foreign power for help. That would have helped to influence the election in his favor if Joe Biden is the nominee for the Democrats. So that in and of itself, you can't do that. One of the constitutional law attorneys who testified, I forget her name now, but she very astutely pointed out the whole reason the founding fathers put in the Constitution that you have to be born an American citizen in order to be eligible for the presidency. You can't be a naturalized citizen. You can't be someone who immigrated here and became an American. You have to be born an American citizen because they were so worried and they had the foresight to be so worried about a foreign power interfering in our elections, or I should say, well, or more specifically, even a foreign power managing to install someone with nefarious ambitions into the White House. So they were so, I mean, paranoid's not the right word, but they were so concerned about that possibility. That's why constitutionally you have to be born an American to even be eligible to run for president. That's how worried they were about foreign influence in our elections. So you can't have the president of the United States asking a foreign power to investigate your political opponent when you're president. You can't do that.
Which is kind of what he did with like you said, that situation and Russia. Russia was like, when that came out, that was a wild situation right there.
Oh, yeah. He publicly said, hey, Russia, if you can find Hillary Clinton's emails, have at it. I mean, yeah, it's you can't do that. Fred Bonig in the Facebook live chat says exactly they didn't want foreign interference. Stefan said, I'm very disappointed that they only came up with 2 impeachable offenses. I thought there could be at least a half a dozen to a half a dozen, 2 dozen. What about profiteering as president? Well, I'm going to get to that, Stefan, because that's another problem that I have. But to me, the first, so you've got the, so that's the first article of impeachment is abuse of power over the Ukraine thing. Like I said, you can take the quid pro quo completely out of it. You still have a problem. Now, where I think they've made a mistake is for the second article of impeachment. They went with obstruction of Congress, not obstruction of justice, which is what he seems to have done, as is illustrated in the Mueller report, but obstruction of Congress, not cooperating with the investigation, blocking, banning all these witnesses from testifying, and although some did anyway, but trying to ban all these witnesses from testifying and claiming executive privilege and whatnot. That to me is, I wouldn't have done obstruction of Congress. Because there's the counter argument to that, and again, I'm not sympathetic to Trump, but the counter argument to obstruction of Congress is, and I think the Republicans, to their credit, are smart to make this argument. How is it obstruction of Congress when the Trump administration is appealing these subpoenas that are being issued? They're going to court and saying, essentially, I mean, I'm speaking in shorthand here, and I'm not a legal expert of any kind, so I can get in over my head with this stuff really quick. So I might be completely wrong. I might completely misunderstand this part of it, because I'm not a legal expert, and I know many of you are probably thinking, yeah, Matt, we kind of noticed, but if I understand this correctly, if the Trump administration is legally fighting those subpoenas in court, how is that obstruction? They're legally fighting in other words, I mean, look, we have 3 co-equal branches of government. You've got the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. So if the legislative branch is issuing subpoenas to members of the executive branch, and the executive branch is going to the judicial branch and saying, hey, can you decide if we have to actually comply with what the legislative branch is asking the executive branch to do? It seems to me that's just part of the whole process of checks and balances. So does obstruction of Congress legally hold up? Is that obstruction, or is that just slowing the whole thing down and dragging out the process, but doing so legally? So and if that is perfectly legal, which it would seem to me it is, how can that be an article of impeachment? Again, I mean, look, now I'm not naive. We all know what's really going on here, right? Obviously, Trump just doesn't want certain people to testify who know too much and could really sink him. I'm sure that's what's really going on. I'm not naive to any of that. And this is an unprecedented obstruction of Congress, if you want to use that phrase. Beyond what we saw with Watergate or with the Clinton impeachment, right? I mean, this is unprecedented. I mean, I've joked about it on the show. I've mockingly said that, gee, until the Trump administration, I didn't know if you were given a subpoena that you could just say, I don't want to comply with that. And then you don't have to, it turns out. Oh, great. But I understand, of course, that it's obviously it's more complicated than that. But I don't know if I would have done obstruction of Congress. I mean, is it is that a kind of a trick of words because, they think that the general public, when they hear obstruction of Congress, people who aren't really paying close attention are going to assume that's the same thing as obstruction of justice. And then they're impeaching Trump on that. I don't know. So to me, that part of it seems weak. Now, where I think the Democrats, what they should have done instead is, first of all, let me put it this way. Instead of Ukraine being the jumping off point, because I do think that's impeachable conduct, again, asking a foreign power for help investigating a political opponent, I think that is clearly impeachable, in my view. But add it to the pile of the 12 instances of clear obstruction, not obstruction of Congress, but yes, obstruction of justice in the Mueller report. And again, I know if you're a MAGA person, it's like, you don't care about it. Oh, that's all fake news. No, I read it. Okay. Again, I'm not a legal scholar, but it seems to me Trump going through all these back channels to find a way to fire Mueller without firing him directly himself, because he knew that if he fired him directly himself, people were going to say, hey, what are you doing? You can't do that, right? So he had to find a sneaky way to do it. And in 12 separate instances, he tried to find a sneaky way to do it that didn't quite work out for him. Oh, and by the way, I love the argument that people make about that. Trump supporters make. Well, none of those instances were successful. Mueller didn't get kicked out of his job. He wasn't successful at getting Mueller out, so it doesn't matter, which is a ridiculous argument. Like, I'm sorry, but if you go to rob a bank and you're not successful at robbing the bank, maybe you go to rob the bank and it turns out the bank doesn't have any money in the vault that day, but the cops still show up and arrest you, you don't get to say in court, well, I didn't get to finish robbing the bank. I didn't get it done, so, you got to acquit me, right? It doesn't work that way. Attempting to commit a crime still gets you in trouble. You don't have to be successful at it. It's like you can go to prison for attempted murder. You don't just go to prison for murder. You can go to prison for attempted murder. I don't know if y'all knew that. So this argument, and you hear the same thing with the Ukraine thing. It's like, well, Trump wasn't successful when he did the quid pro quo. He wasn't successful at getting what he wanted. The Ukrainians didn't give him what he wanted. So what's it matter? It's like, well, again, he tried to get help from a foreign power to hurt his political opponent. Didn't work out. Although in some ways it did, because that's the irony of the whole thing, right? In some ways it actually did work out, because now you've got everybody on Fox News and everybody in conservative talk radio going, oh my God, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, they're criminals. And we have proof that they're criminals and we need to lock them up with Hillary. And so in a way it actually did kind of work, just in a not exactly the way they intended. But there's a couple things, and Stefan has mentioned something too, a couple of other things where they should have gone after Trump, including, of course, the Mueller report, but a couple other things too. But Fred says, and by the way, Fred is also a top fan. Fred says the problem is it about interfering in an election? The longer you wait, but if the Republicans bring Hunter in, then they are doing what Trump wanted anyway, drag Biden into the conspiracy. Right, exactly. I agree, Fred, 100%. Oh, Stefan mentions too, threatening to prosecute rivals, right? Yeah, you can't that refers to back in 2016 during when Trump would lead these crowds of his adoring fans in chants of "lock her up," and Trump even said it during one of the debates. He said if he told Hillary, if I were president, you'd be in prison. Of course, that hasn't
happened.
That hasn't quite worked out. No,
that won't happen.
That's gone about as well as the whole building the wall thing.
Yeah, for real.
No, the wall's going to happen though. Eventually, I think we're just waiting for Mexico to pay the invoice.
Yeah, for sure. It's a pretty big invoice though, so they might have to make a few payments.
Any day now.
They might finance it.
Any day now. Yes. So a big thing that I've been talking about on the show that I don't know why the Democrats haven't hammered more on this is Rudy Giuliani. Now, obviously, we've heard his name a lot during the hearings, and Gordon Sondland talked about, and I think it was in his opening remarks, because he had like a 45-minute, it was Sondland, right? I think who had like a 45-minute opening speech or statement. I think it was Sondland. He said flat out that nobody wanted to work with Rudy, but everyone understood that they had to work with Rudy on Ukraine. And the Democrats, if they're going to make one of the articles of impeachment obstruction of Congress, well, here's something. Look, here's an example with Giuliani of the executive branch actually completely circumventing the legislative branch. Because with Rudy Giuliani, you have someone who Trump either put in place or allowed to put himself in place. However it is he got there, Rudy Giuliani, a man who is not a member of the Trump administration, was never confirmed by the Senate. Remember, we confirm these people. If you want to be Secretary of State, for example, right? If you want Mike Pompeo's job, you have to go through a Senate confirmation. In other words, the legislative branch has to approve the executive branch putting you in charge of really important stuff like an element of our foreign policy, in this case, Ukraine. You have to go through a process. Trump put Rudy Giuliani, a man who is not a member of the administration, not a federal employee of any type. I mean, he was at one time. He was a federal prosecutor years and years ago, but not currently, right? Never confirmed by the Senate to do diddly in our federal government. Nothing. Trump's personal attorney. And Trump put him in charge of Ukraine, essentially, of our policy in Ukraine, telling Sondland and Volker and everybody else, or either Trump told them directly or they all knew, or however all the communication went down. Everybody knew Rudy's in charge. We all got to go through Rudy Giuliani, a private citizen, Trump's personal attorney. I am baffled. I am completely baffled. And this is part of what I meant in my Facebook post earlier, where I say the Democrats have botched this. They've talked about Giuliani, but they have not hammered that point home. Trump circumvented the legislative branch by putting Giuliani in charge with no Senate confirmation, allowing him to run a shadow operation in Ukraine. That should be its own article of impeachment. You can't do that. I don't know if there's another example. I mean, I almost wish Hopwood were here because he would know. Maybe Fred knows. I don't know of another example, at least not in modern American history, where that's happened. And look, I'm not naive. I know that, we have back channel communications going on with everybody and there's people involved, and, probably a good thing in some instances too. For example, in the during the Cuban Missile Crisis, if it wasn't for that guy, Fulman, was that his name? Anyway, without getting, it's my favorite part of American history. Actually, anything Cold War related is fascinating to me, but I'm particularly fascinated by the Cuban Missile Crisis. I read and watch everything I can find on it. But there was some back channel communication going on there that, probably a good thing, or I would never have been born and none of us would be here. So I understand that. But Rudy in the mix talking to everybody and doing whatever he's doing, and then you got these other characters who are apparently criminals that are associated with him. That's not a back channel thing. That's him in charge. He was essentially Gordon Sondland's boss and Volker's boss. And what's her name? I can picture her, but I forget her name now. Well, you all know who I mean. Like, he was the guy. He's in charge. And I don't know why the Democrats haven't made more of that. That should be its own article of impeachment. The president, in any other era, the following statement would sound completely absurd. But this is where we are. The president of the United States put his personal lawyer in charge of an aspect of our foreign policy. In any other era, that sentence would make you go, what? That's absurd. But no, that's where we are. The president of the United States put his personal lawyer, who apparently works pro bono, by the way, in charge of a major aspect of our foreign policy. And the Democrats, again, I don't know why I'm not saying they let it slide, because we heard about that, certainly. But that should be its own article of impeachment, in my opinion. Let's see. So Stefan said the profiteering one could have gone really, really bad for Trump, and the Democrats could have just kept talking and talking about how it's benefited not just Trump, but his family, with so many examples. Yes, a violation of the emoluments clause. That seems to get sticky, though. The emoluments clause, of course, which says that, you can't profit from your job as a public official or an elected official or president of the United States, for that matter. But that it seems like there's different legal interpretations of it. So I don't know of an example yet where the courts have actually ruled against Trump. There may be something, but I don't know. Yeah, I would have. Yeah, maybe it's better that they left that alone because it gets so sticky. But again, I would have my articles of impeachment, my wish list of articles of impeachment would have been, yes, abuse of power in regard to Ukraine, obstruction of justice. I mean, why does everybody act like the Mueller report never happened? I mean, why do the Democrats think, well, we can't bring that up because the Republicans are just going to say the opposite of what we say? Because the Republicans, Collins and Matt Gaetz, boy, that guy's a trip, huh?
Oh man, he was going off during when I came in to the show and you were streaming the impeachment hearings.
Yes,
he just went off.
Yeah. And by the way, I made a comment to Jenny the other night. There's no way that guy is not somehow maybe a distant relative, but he's got to be somehow related to Donny Osmond. I mean, he looks exactly like a young Donny Osmond. Not that that's bad. Hey, I think Soldier of Love is a great song. But I said that out loud. Yikes. But, it's what are the Democrats worried about? We can't bring up the Mueller report because the Republicans are just going to say the opposite. Well, it's the same thing with Ukraine. They just say the opposite. I mean, you've got Trump coming flatly saying, need a favor from you, want you to investigate the Bidens, et cetera. And the Republicans just say, nope, nothing here. So they're going to do that no matter what. But yeah, I would have, again, you're building something here, right? You're building a portfolio of things. It doesn't have to just be Ukraine. And again, the obstruction of Congress part to me is weak. I mean, we all know what's going on, right? We all know the deal, but I wouldn't have gone with that. I would have gone with abuse of power. I would have gone with the Mueller stuff, the obstruction of justice. And again, I would have gone with whatever I don't know what the legal term would be for the Giuliani thing. Maybe it's just me. Maybe, am I wrong? Have I misunderstood something about Rudy Giuliani's role in all of this? Because I don't hear, not only do I not hear the Democrats hammering that more, or at least as much as I think they should be, but I don't hear anybody even on cable news or on the websites that I look at really hammering that either. It's kind of weird. To me, it's weird. So am I just overreacting to that? Maybe it's just me? Am I making a bigger deal? To me, it's a big deal. The president of the United States putting his personal attorney in charge of Ukraine policy, to me, seems really effed up. But am I making too big a deal of it somehow? Am I hyper fixated on that and I shouldn't be? Because I don't hear anybody. Again, I mean, I hear people mentioning it and how that's not okay, but I don't get why that's not a bigger deal than it is, I guess, is what I'm saying. You know? I don't know. Maybe I'm making too much of that. I mean, it's to me, it's crazy. And by the way, speaking of Matt Gaetz, I'll actually give him credit. He acknowledged on somebody's show, had to be on Fox, right? I'm sure that's the only network he goes on, that he didn't understand Giuliani going to in the midst of all of this. Giuliani takes another trip to Ukraine, and allegedly Giuliani told Trump that he dug up a whole bunch more stuff on the Bidens or something. I don't know. Let's see. Stefan says, violated campaign finance. I mean, you have people that have her arrested and prosecuted in jail for this under Trump. Why isn't Trump being tried like the people that did the dirty work? Well, that's the thing. You know, a lot of Trump is draining the swamp. He's just doing it in his own special way. He's getting everybody around him arrested. There's so many people who have worked for Trump, who've been associated with Trump through all this, who are now in jail. It's incredible. It's one of these witch hunts where you just walk out of your front door and all the witches are just landing in your front lawn, right there in the yard. Yes. I don't hear that. I will say this. I don't hear the Republicans using that phrase quite as much lately, witch hunt. But yeah, we know where this is going to end up. Like I said, CNN is reporting the end could be swift. Impeachment heads to full House after historic vote. So, of course, the Democratically controlled House will vote to impeach. The Republican-controlled Senate will vote to acquit. And that'll be it. And then what do? This is the other thing, too, because we'll wrap up on this in a minute, but because we're a little past the top of the hour. But the other thing, too, is, and this is where people have been really second-guessing the Democrats, is have the Democrats made a mistake in not being more patient, allowing the process to play out as far as, subpoenaing these people, and then it goes to court, and then the courts have to rule on whether or not they have to adhere to the subpoena. Have the Democrats been a little too quick and impatient with this? Because now that this is coming to a head and it's all going to be over soon, they're going to impeach, the Senate will acquit, done. Then, after that, what happens if Trump continues to flagrantly violate the very things he's been impeached for? Do you restart the process? See, that's the problem with the process going as quickly as it has. What do you do now? The process is about to be over. And for the Democrats, it's about to have a very unsatisfying end. And then what if Trump, because remember, the call with the Ukrainian president happened right after the Mueller report came out. And Trump said, "Oh, I've been exonerated. I've been completely exonerated. Now I can do whatever I want. I mean, he didn't literally say he can't. Well, actually, he did say he could do whatever he want in another instance. But when he said, according to Article 2 of the Constitution, the president can do whatever he wants, which is not literally true. And in that moment, he became Richard Nixon. Because when he said, well, Article 2 of the Constitution says the president can do whatever he wants, that's basically the same thing as when Richard Nixon said during the David Frost interviews, well, when the president does it, it's not illegal. Right? The same logic and misunderstanding of how this all works, I would suggest. But after the Mueller report, and he claimed his exoneration, and the entire Republican Party backed him up on that, with the exception of a few people, a very few people. Then he goes and does this Ukraine that he right after he claims he's been exonerated of anything, he goes and does this this call with the Ukraine president. It's like, you know what it was? I'm sorry. I've got the timeline a little bit wrong. It was right after the Mueller report. Forgive me. It's hard to keep it all straight. There's so much here. The Trump era.
It's the time-space continuum. It's broken.
It really is. It really is. The Trump era is so, it really has messed up time. I mean, for one thing, it feels like he's been president for 20 years. But, and it's only his first term. Yay. But, no, I remember what it was now. It was right after the Mueller report came out, and he's telling everyone he's completely exonerated. And then he tells George Stephanopoulos during that interview, when Stephanopoulos asks him, if a foreign power comes to you offering you dirt on a political opponent, what do you do? And he's just like, well, I think you'd have to look at it. It's like, no, that's not the right answer. You don't do that. You contact the Justice Department or the FBI. You don't just, you don't just say, oh yeah, I'd look at it. But Trump felt emboldened. So he went and solicited help from Ukraine. And of course, him and everybody else now on the right, they're pushing these bogus conspiracy theories. Let's see. Stefan says, well, also Mitch McConnell and a bunch of Republicans will have to rescue themselves, because once they take the oath that they're going to look at this constitutionally and impartially, they've broken the oath, because they said things now that show they're not going to be impartial. They're not being impartial. And then Fred posted something. Oh, the list grows. All these newspapers, I assume their editorial boards are saying impeach. The Washington Post, the LA Times, the Boston Globe, the Orlando Sentinel, the Philadelphia Inquirer, USA Today, and the Tampa Bay Times. Well, you know what Trump would say about all that is the media, they're all out to get me. Trump doesn't even like Fox News that much anymore.